Yuta in Shibuya? What an interesting conundrum. What's up, guys? I'm here, and here we are to do a breakdown / live reaction, review, and analysis of Six's What If Yuta Was in Shibuya? And I'm very excited. I already did a reaction to Six's What If Hakari Was in Shibuya, and another reaction on What If Hakari Was in Shibuya, but now we're here for another type of Hakari in Shibuya, not Hakari. We're here for Yuta Kotsu in Shibuya. I'm also writing my own variation of this. Once again, it's sort of... not even sort of, it's just very complicated because of the timeline stuff and where you plug Yuta, so I'm interested to see where Six ends up plugging Yuta. As always, we know we got a lot to talk about, so let's not waste any more time, and let's hop right into it. Editing me. Are you ready? 3, 2, 1... go.
With it being Halloween, the day the Shibuya incident officially takes place in the Jujutsu Kaisen universe.
What's up, guys? That guy with a pencil here. Fun fact, I do happen to have it on me and keep it on me at all times. And another fun fact, I'm here to yap extensively. Extremely extensively. So extensively, in fact, that I've come to warn you actively right here. Right now. If you want to check out the original video without all my yapping, the link to Six's channel and the original video will be in the description down below. Please go check it out. Go leave a like. If I sent you over there, listen. No, I always appreciate it. But like I said, we got a lot to yap about. But first things first, let me give a general overview of what I think happens if Yuta's in Shibuya. If he can't interfere with the first fight, Gojo still gets trapped, and Kenny likely still escapes. I think that combo is still way too likely. Notably, with Sukuna's recent statements in the manga about mainly our cast's defensive capabilities drastically increasing and not necessarily anything else, like their reinforcement has gotten better, but the reinforcement has only come to their physical abilities, meaning their striking strength and their speed hasn't actually gotten much better, then current Yuta is just Shibuya Yuta. So like, okay. And he also has less techniques, because this Yuta in this timeline would not have sky manipulation, would not have Jujutsu technique, so he'd basically be limited to cursed speech and whatever he can pick up along the way. But even still, Yuta stat-wise is kind of like really monstrous. And as much smack as Kenny was talking, I still don't think he'd want to interact with Yuta, not in this moment. So like, he'd probably just leave. However, I think everyone survives, depending on where you plug Yuta. If you plug Yuta anywhere, like literally anywhere, he just fixes every single problem. You plug him with Yuji and Ino and Megami, he washes the Rama. Toji never gets summoned. Fights. Like they just wash Awasaka together, and then they scurry into Shibuya. You put him with the Maki crew, saying he really want to go with Maki because he, you know how Yuta feels about Maki. You know what I'm talking about. So like, you send him with the Maki group. Dagon gets spat at. Like literally, Yuta grabs Dagon by the face, straight in his mouth, and then RCT, Dagon explodes, Nanbi gets no damage, Maki gets no damage, Naruto gets no damage, Jogo pulls up, Chad walking, also gets smacked by Yuta. Plus Rika. I think you would need Rika for Jogo considering Jogo's speed, but with an Naruto there easily able to combo Jogo into Yuta and Rika, Jogo also gets low diff. Another low diff. Mahito, considering the whole crew would be unharmed, and considering Mahito ran in to Nanami before he ran into anybody else, I think it's very likely that he'd run into that full crew, and then Yuta once again spits in his mouth, and then boom, because Mahito's a curse. I don't like the video. But if you think that won't happen, because, you know, the whole soul interaction thing, Mahito tries to use L Transfiguration once. It fails on anyone there, except for, like, maybe Maki. Even then, who knows? If Yuta would even let Mahito tag Maki. Yuta then realizes, oh, I can't beat this guy without his own technique. He then slides the ring on, eats a piece of Mahito if you think that's a requirement, which it seems to be. I think it is now confirmed that it's a requirement, which is weird. It makes some things weird, but still. He eats a piece of Mahito. He then gets L Transfiguration. He then smacks Mahito. And then everyone lives. I don't think Kenny would interfere to try and save Mahito, and the killing games would be delayed exponentially because Kenny would have to go around and set it up manually. So, it's overall just a positive scenario. Once again, it's kind of like what happens when you put Akari in Shibuya. Plot breaks, but not entirely. Like, Gojo still gets sealed, and the killing games just take longer. So, like, it just puts a halt on the plot for the most part. I don't think anyone And obviously more characters survive. Naruto survives, which means no awakened Maki. Like, in the long run, there's just going to be no awakened Maki, because Megumi never becomes Zenin Clan head, so that's a bad thing. So you lose awakened Maki. That's the main thing I say you lose, but then you keep Nobara, you keep Naobito, you keep Nanami, you keep... Who am I thinking of? Toto. Toto wouldn't lose his hand here. So you essentially you trade awakened Maki for a bunch of weaker characters. Depends on how valuable you think that trade-off is. But those are my loose, quick, 5-minute spiel thoughts. Let's see what Six has to say. I'm bound to go Joe Santoru's second in Shibuya.
First, I thought it'd be the best time to explore a scenario where Shibuya may could have turned in the favor of the protagonist, and that's if Yuta was around during the events of the arc, to offer more firepower on our hero side. Obviously, I'm going to have to make decisions for the characters that are up for interpretation. These are just going to be my interpretations of how things could go down, but there are likely a million combinations of how you could reframe and rewrite this arc. Before we get started, I'd like to ask if you could leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, as I greatly appreciate it. Given Yuta's immense power, I don't see him operating alongside any of the other people of Jujutsu High and Shibuya. Just before entering the Culling Games, they mentioned how it's more strategical for Yuta to operate alone rather than going with Yuji and Megumi, even though it would be safer for Megumi because of Sukuna. And given Yuta's first opponents, it's hard to argue that Yuji and Megumi would be anything other than a hindrance against people like Ryu and Uro. This being said, Yuta is still massively weaker than Gojo, so it's not like he'll be sent in to help him deal with the curses in the train station. So I think Gojo getting sealed is probably just as likely, but it's getting to the goal.
Notably though, I think it's not the fact... These brings up a good point. I didn't think of Yuta running solo. That may still cause problems, because Yuta may not run into anybody. Like, where is he running solo? I think if he runs into Choso, he watches Choso. And then I guess Yuji never gets incapacitated enough for Jogo to come find him. But then, like, that's interesting. Yuta running solo. I assumed he'd go with one of the groups. If Yuta runs solo, that causes problems. Because I just don't know who he'd run into. Because there aren't enough antagonists. Like, he wouldn't run into anybody, I don't think. But he brings up an interesting point about Yuta still being massively weaker than Gojo, so he wouldn't be sent in. I don't think anyone else but Gojo could have entered the barrier anyway. But if you do throw Yuta in there, then the fight becomes infinitely easier. Because once again, Yuta spits in the mouth of Hanami and Jogo, and then they lose. Like, what is Gojo's big issue? Oh no, even if I get my hands on them, it's going to be super difficult to eradicate them. Kind of, sort of, even though he could have easily one-shot them anyway with, like, blues on their bodies. But, you know, another discussion for another time. I think Gojo, he definitely fumbled Shibuya in a couple ways. But it's Gojo. He fumbles a lot of things. So, we'll talk about that in another video. But, with that being the case, Yuta being there means Gojo doesn't get sealed. If he could be there. But I'm pretty sure the barrier made it so that only Gojo Satoru could enter. No one else could anyway. That's why when Yuji punches the barrier, he can't break through it. And they need to go a roundabout way to go find the grasshopper in order to go stop the barrier. So I don't think Yuta could have entered, but if you were to plug Yuta in here, Gojo doesn't get sealed. Then the plot really can't happen, because then Gojo one-shot Kenjaku. Or by the time that Kenjaku pulls up with the prison realm, if Yuta's still there, he's going to like grab Gojo out of the way, or attack Kenjaku before Kenjaku can close up the prison realm, and then Kenny wouldn't be able to escape. It'd be Yuta versus Kenny proper, and of course Kenny would still have a massive advantage because he still has the open barrier domain. He would be on guard this time, but if Yuta still has the same speed stat he does as current Yuta in base, he would still wipe Kenny, unfortunately. And you could definitely argue Yuta would be able to face tank Kenny's domain better than someone like Yuki could. And considering Yuta wouldn't know it's open barriered, he'd likely go band for band in terms of domain expansion. Now, he would have way less techniques. He'd only have cursed speech in his domain. But with Kenny's sure hit being blocked out even for a couple seconds, both of them being domain amped, Yuta's still likely low diffing Kenny, with the new context of how Yuta and Kenny scale to each other. So, like, yeah, plot can happen if Yuta interferes here, but he can't. I'm interested. Yuta alone. That's going to be neat. Let's see how he tackles it.
Of Gojo getting unsealed that Yuta potentially makes a bit more likely. First and foremost, I think it's pretty likely that Yuta would be instructed as Gojo's backup instead of Mei, which, reading this statement from Mei's little brother, seems like Gojo instructed her to do so. Here you run into a small issue because there is Mekamaru and how much information he gave Yuji that made a lot of the moves in Shibuya change. This is going to be the first controversial change I'll make to the arc, and that's switching who Mekamaru chooses to talk to. I think Mekamaru would still choose to help, of course, but I think he'd help Yuta. Given all the time he spent in Africa, it's likely he's not the mole at Jujutsu High, so Mekamaru would have no problem helping him. After receiving the information that Gojo is sealed and that he can't be moved,
I thought Mekamaru was the mole at Jujutsu High. I need to reread Shibuya. In fact, let me read this text real quick. That goes up to, sorry, I don't have any proof, but if I say something, in fact, here I am proof. I was slaughtered on October 19th by a great curse called Mahito. Why I'm not? Continuously before I perish. Mei, limited situation, Yuji. Oh, yeah. Oh, I forgot about that plot line. Was that ever resolved? Who ended up being? I forget who ended up being the mole. I thought it was Mekamaru. But I forget who actually the mole ended up being. Maybe it was Baby. I forget. I completely forgot about that plot line. But with that being the case, that's a big thing. If no one knows Gojo's sealed because Mekamaru chooses to talk to Yuta, that's gonna be interesting. Let's see.
likely Yuta would tell everyone just like Yuji did, especially considering that was Mekamaru's plan in the first place.
Oh, okay. So
I suppose Yuta could just yell really loudly the way that Yuji did to get everyone's attention. I would say he'd use the cursed speech megaphone he used in Volume 0 on Ghetto, but given how now he can only use curse techniques he's copied while fully manifesting Rika, which only lasts for 5 minutes, I doubt he'd waste it on this unless there is some way he could put Rika back and reset the cooldown, but I don't know if that's possible, and I think it's being pretty generous to Yuta to make that assumption. At this point, things are going to take a pretty sharp turn from the main story, precisely because they have so much firepower on their team with Yuta, who essentially is a two-man army with Rika. Even with her not being fully manifested, he had her in a separate location during the Culling Games when she was protecting the people at the stadium. Given this aspect of Rika, it's very likely that Yuta can find the people who cast the curtain that doesn't allow sorcerers in and deal with them. Obviously, I'm talking about Awasaka, Granny with the seance technique, and her grandchild. Depending on which one Yuta chooses to do will depend on if Toji is able to come out or not. The plan to corner the curses in B5F is still likely going to be the play, but with Rika, Yuta himself can cover 2 of the sides, and for the sake of simplicity, let's just say everyone chooses the route they took in the original story. Nanami should still run into Ichichi, seemingly unalived, and then to Nobara to eventually get to Dagon. Now, I need to walk it back a bit to destroying the curtain, since although it would be strategically wise for Yuta and Rika to split up, I don't think it's all too likely, at least not at this point. Especially since there are other sorcerers there, and while Yuta is doing this, they could be doing something else, but it brings up a number of complications, and some of them can lead to an outcome that could be seen as worse than what originally happened. For one, if Yuta fights Awasaka and the seance technique grandmother, while I have no doubt in my mind that he'd be able to defeat them eventually, if not even more quickly than Yuji and Megumi did, if Toji doesn't spawn in, it's not all too likely Maki and Obito and Nanami make it out of the Dagon fight alive. I suppose it's possible.
That's the big thing, right? Yuta is most advantageous in Shibuya if he's traveling with somebody else, because then he stops people from perishing. But he's right. Notably, because the big thing that we don't know, because of Toji's interference, is what would have happened to Dagon after his domain was shut down. Because remember, the original plan was Megumi opens the portal, they all dive out, and then I guess they start jumping Dagon again while his technique is on burnout because his domain would be closed. But remember, Megumi would be super low on curse energy and also experiencing technique burnout considering his domain would likely collapse in time with Dagon's. Maki would still have some damage on her and clearly wasn't keeping up with Dagon anyway. Naobito would still be able to keep up and mostly blitz Dagon, but the ability to exercise Dagon is highly unlikely. Naobito simply doesn't have that attack potency. And same thing with Nanami. And then remember, Jogo is Chad walking. I was afraid I might get. Jogo was Chad walking around the corner just waiting. So Jogo cooks them all. Because Yuta's not traveling with anybody. That's the unfortunate thing. And, like Six says, if Toji doesn't get summoned, they likely all perish. If not to Dagon, then to Jogo. But then again, the question also is, what happened with Yuji and Choso? Did that still happen? Same way it did in canon? If so, then Yuji's still knocked out. And then Jogo still goes and finds him, but then it's going to be a fatigued Dagon and Jogo up against 15-finger Sukuna. And without... Here's the thing, though. The question is, does Megami summon Big Raga? Because if Megami summons Big Raga there, then there's more problems on top of that. Because if Megami summons Big Raga, in that moment, not waiting, not caring anything about it, he's like, dude, either I go or we go. Then Raga likely one-taps Dagon and Jogo because of the speed scaling and the RCT blade. And then... yeah, then everyone perishes. Because there'd be no Sukuna. There'd be no Toji, and there'd be no Sukuna. Because, notably, if Megami summons Raga on Jogo and Dagon, then everybody there perishes anyway. Because everyone would presumably be included in the ritual, and Maharaga would slaughter them all. And then Maharaga would just despawn after Megami despawns. So I guess Raga doesn't actually become a problem. It's just that you lose Megami, and you lose Maki, and you lose Nabito, and you lose Nanami way earlier. But then you lose Jogo and Dagon. So you do kind of get a trade-off there, 4 sorcerers for 2 disaster curses, but then Mahito's able to run free. And then no one would be there to heal Yuji. Oh, yes, that could be a darker timeline. I see what he's saying here. That could be very, very dark.
At this point, Megami stays with Nanami, and so does Ino, so I guess they have more firepower versus Dagon. But I'm not too sure it would matter. For one, it can't be ignored that while Megami can open a domain to cancel Dagon's sure hit, he won't know where the bottom of the barrier is to open a hole in it since he didn't break in, and eventually his domain will be crushed by Dagon's, and when that happens, everyone inside the domain will be done for. Not saying this will happen, it's just something to take note of before we move on. To be fair as well, even if Granny does summon Toji again, let's just say it takes Yuta a long time to figure out Awasaka's curse technique. Toji, when he's in rampage mode, goes for the strongest around, and that would undeniably be Yuta. And I've already made a long video about Yuta versus Toji. In it, I concluded Toji would win, but that was with a few...
Oh, it's man, I wish I watched that video. You know, I'm a big Toji glacier. I'm something of a Toji glacier myself, you know. But I do think Shibuya Toji, I don't know though. That's actually a question because this is a way weaker Yuta too. I think Toji would still win that. He'd have better speed stats. Probably enough potency with Playful Cloud, especially if he sharpens it, to damage Yuta. And with Yuta only having Cursed Speech, which Toji would like be able to precog dodge, that could still go in Toji's favor. But yeah, he fights Yuta. Oh, yeah, that's gonna be bad. Because at best, even if we give Yuta the dub, he's burned his 5 minutes. There is no more fully manifested Rika. But of course, base Yuta could still handle the rest of Shibuya. But losing fully manifested Rika is still annoying. You'd now be left with unmanifested Rika and heavily fatigued Yuta. So yeah, there really is. Ooh, yeah, this is bad. There's no goodness in this timeline so far. Let's see.
Parameters in place that this Toji does not have. One of the main ones being his Soul Split Katana, or any other curse tool for that matter, because without one he cannot damage Rika, and while there is the possibility of inflicting damage on Yuta, I don't think Toji actually hits hard enough without his sword or a curse tool to actually damage Yuta. So there's no real...
That is a big thing, and I've talked about this loosely before in the Toji versus Kashimo video that I did a while back. Maki, and I'll say this wholeheartedly, as a Maki beat muncher and a Toji glazer, a Toji toe taster, yeah, their AP kind of sucks. Like, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but like striking strength wise, they are heavily reliant on Soul Split. Because like, they don't really have any feat that's above disaster curse level with their raw strength or special grade curse tier. And Yuta's explicitly noted to be way bulkier than that. Even Riri Shigori, the man with the hardest hitting hits in all of history, even he struggles to damage Yuta with his regular punches. And I'm sorry, as much as I love Toji and Maki, they aren't hitting harder than Ryu. They simply are not. And with Playful Cloud, the only thing you could hypothetically argue is that, well, adult Geto was able to deflect and knock around and move around Rika and Yuta. So, but then again, does Geto ever even damage Rika? I don't think he does. Does he damage Yuta? I think maybe a little. So, like, the only thing you'd argue is that Toji would have to go for, like, verbatim human weaks. He'd have to, like, try and pierce Yuta dead in the eye. Because everything else would just bounce off. Because Yuta's that bulky. It's why, notably, in the Kashima matchup, I mentioned that Kashima would literally bulk everything that Toji throws at him, unless it's Soul Split. Inverted Spirit of Heaven, the regular katana, any split gooters, none of that would work on Kashima, because Kashima also has insane bulk. But that bulk is even less than Yuta's. And Yuta's bulk is crazy. So yeah, I agree. In the sense that Toji against Yuta would have a really, really bad matchup. Unlike Hikari, where Hikari, in base at least, and even in Jackpot, ironically enough, doesn't necessarily have any durability feats. That would imply he's on Yuta's level in terms of sheer bulk and durability. So while I think a Hikari could end up losing to a Shibuya Toji quite consistently, whether it be due to the fact that Toji would outlast him in Jackpot, like he'd just be able to eat all of Jackpot's hits since Hikari's a pillow puncher, and then just wait for Jackpot to run out. Hikari can't get it again, and then he just minks Hikari in base, because, yeah, Toji, especially Toji Zenin, the prime variation of Toji, especially with Playful Cloud, would do crazy numbers to base Hikari. Yuta, even in base, is bulky as all get out. Insanely beefy. So, yeah, Toji would stall Yuta a lot, and I'd still say, because of Toji's crazy speed, he'd probably force Yuta to pull out the microphone. He'd cause that. He would rip that out of Yuta, especially even if Yuta didn't want to do it. He'd be like, I have to do this as a last resort. And then he'd pull it out. Stop Toji, possibly because Toji wouldn't maybe recognize Kurt's speech in his more primordial state, and then he'd beat Toji. But once again, Yuta's been stalled. Dagon got everybody. Jogo got everybody. Like, so I think this may end up being a darker timeline based on how Six built it.
Way that I'd say Toji could win this fight this time around. From here, again, there are a couple different possibilities. Assuming Yuji continued with Mei from their original story position, then it's likely he'd be there during the fight with Kenjaku's smallpox deity, which could have swung the fight more convincingly in their favor, considering Mei thinks Yuji is on par with the Grade 1 sorcerer, but there is also the possibility Yuji could meet his end in that fight, although I don't think it's likely. Given Kenjaku's planning and awareness, I highly doubt he'd go after Mei when Yuta is in Shibuya and on his way down to B5F at this point. Now comes the hunt for Yuji the Disaster Curses and Choso started playing, but
that's the big thing though. There's a high likelihood that the moment the Prison Realm seals Gojo and Kenjaku can move it, he's left. In fact, I'll be real, there's very little reason for him to stick around in the original narrative too. Like, he just does it solely to flex. Like, he literally walks up on Mei. Chad walks up on Mei. He's like, hey, yo, what's good, senpai? Sorry we had to meet this way. But that's because he found there was no threats there. And even if he thinks Yuta isn't a threat, another special grade would just be annoying. You see how he reacted to Yuki? He didn't even want smoke. He was like, and then he left immediately. So knowing Yuta's there from rip, you're all be like, come on, let's go. We pick up the box and try to leave. Presumably. But, oh, wait, no. Kenny would stick around because of Mahito. He would stick around very specifically so he could get Mahito. That's the big thing, though. He would not dip straight out of Shibuya because of Mahito. Because he needs that. So he'd linger. He'd be slippery, though. I don't think he'd be staying in one place, and Six is right. I don't think he'd try and stick around and mess with Mei. He'd only be like, he'd skirt around the entire scenario and wait for somebody to do something to Mahito. But then if Yuta runs up on Mahito, but I'm not sure how that works in this time. Let's let Six cook some more.
There would be one key difference this time. In the original story, Mahito says that with Gojo now sealed away, he thinks the humans and curses are now about even. With the introduction of Yuta, that would obviously no longer be the case, so...
And also, he's just wrong. in the original narrative. Like, it was drastically in the curse's favor. If there's no Toji and there's no Sukuna, I mentioned this before in the Hikari video, I do believe, everybody dies. No one at the time of Shibuya, not Todo, not 120% Yuji, not anybody there outside of Yuki showing up super duper late, was beating Jogo. Not to talk of Jogo, Dagon, well, Hanami got, but Jogo, Dagon, and Mahito. Was not happening. Simply was not happening. Sukuna did the cast a favor by taking out Jogo. As much as I clown on Jogo, Jogo was that powerful. He would have wiped the whole cast on his own if he really had the chance, but Sukuna came out. Of Jogo's own free volition, right, but Jogo did himself in. The curses had an easy dub there, at least in my opinion.
Here we run into another fork in the road. Did Kenjaku plan on Yuta arriving and have a contingency plan to fight him as well, or is Yuta's presence a surprise that these enemies simply couldn't prepare for? Given how events played out in the original story, I'm going to say Yuta's presence is definitely a surprise for Kenjaku.
Yeah.
All Gojo would have to do is, prior to entering Shibuya, teleport to Africa and quickly explain the situation to Yuta, saying that he wanted Yuta to protect the sorceress there as his backup. Yuta would likely agree, or in this scenario he already has, and teleport back to Japan with Gojo. It's also not too likely that even if Kenjaku did know Yuta was around, that he'd do all too much planning for him anyway, since Kenjaku thinks Yuta is all hype. I like to say Kenjaku's reasoning for Yuta being all hype is kind of flawed to me. He says to Gojo that while Yuta has the ability to unconditionally copy curse techniques, debatable but whatever, and has boundless cursed energy, both the result of him having to
he's spitting right now. He's spitting. Kenjaku did directly underestimate Yuta. But, yeah, we know it's conditionally now. Which I think is a nerf. I kind of don't. I really... It's unfortunate. I've said this before, I'll say it again. I really don't like the consistent trend of every single time an ability gets further elaboration in JJK, it gets weaker. This is just a pattern every single time. The more and more we explore things, the weaker and weaker they get. It happened to Limitless, it happened to Yuta, it happened to SSK, the Soul Split Katana, it happened to Cleave and Dismantle. The more and more we explore things, the weaker and weaker they get. Not necessarily inverse, but cross-verse. And JJK already, outside of Gojo, and I guess now Sukuna, isn't a verse that's that strong. Cross-verse. Not in contention with some of the more popular ones that you throw in versus battles, like your Narutos, your Bleaches, your One Pieces, your... Well, Seven Deadly Sins isn't that popular, but hey, I talk about Seven Deadly Sins and stuff like that. So, him having a condition, a little bit whack. But, yeah, I agree. Kenny was definitely... Especially in retrospect, now that we know the scaling, and now that we know that the boost that everyone got was solely defensive, meaning their offense stats and their speed stats have mostly stayed linear. Yeah, I don't know. Kenny was off that za, but let's see.
In his loved one's soul. I think what Kenjaku is implying here is that Rika is the one everyone should be giving the credit to, but that's dumb in my opinion because I don't know if he knows this or not, but if Yuta comes down to fight him, Rika's gonna be right there with him. But no matter which way, Kenjaku's lack of a plan for Yuta is definitely in the good guys' favor, but it all really boils down to how Yuta
Yeah, in retrospect, it is weird to interpret. Once again, that always comes with hindsight. I guess Six is right, like the idea that Kenjaku was mainly attributing that to Rika. But, yeah. Because Kenny should know that Yuta regained his status as a special grade, likely through regaining his connection to Rika. I would get it if Kenny was dumb and didn't know that Yuta got Rika back. Because, like, yeah, a post-Zero Yuta is garbage. He has no Rika. He has no curse technique. He has nothing. But he very quickly got that connection back within those 3 months. That's how he rose to be the second strongest of the modern day. So, like, Kenny not knowing that in retrospect is really, really stupid. Look at spit on that one.
Comes across all these curses, and the really important one is obviously Mahito. I'll say this now, it's not realistic for Yuta to know the feel of any of the disaster curses' cursed energy. He should, regardless of that, be able to tell that they are incredibly strong cursed spirits that should be exorcised. However, bringing up being realistic again, it's not likely Yuta would run around Shibuya exercising disaster curses that he has no idea are tied to the attack on Gojo, while Gojo is sealed and the person responsible is a fake Geto that is unable to move from that position. At best, I could see him going after Mahito after Mekamaru tells him who Mahito is. But at the same time, Mekamaru would probably stress how important it is to get the fake Geto instead. At the point Yuta would lift the veil and, assuming a possible scuffle with Toji that shouldn't last too long, he should probably continue along the same road Yuji was in the main story to get down to...
You know what the crazy thing is? Unironically, Yuta could probably just ignore Toji. This is going to sound so bad, especially as a Toji glazed, this is going to sound horrible. But like, Shibuya Toji without the AP to damage Yuta would very likely sense Geto's cursed energy. Because remember, it's implied, if not outright stated by Gojo, hey, Six Eyes are telling me you're legit just Suguru Geto. It's my soul that knows you're not Suguru Geto. So, like, Yuta would likely, the moment he takes on the veil, sense Geto's energy and be like, what? And then immediately book it. So, I agree with Six here. The only hypothetical one that he would go after is Mahito, but even then, I think he's going to ignore him. Not only at Mekamaru's request, who likely knows Yuta's level of power, but also just logistically, as Geto would be the only stream of curse energy that Yuta would recognize. So he'd be like, wait a second, I offed you a year ago. Why are you alive? And he'd book it straight down there to run smoke. He'd be like, what are you doing here? I could have sworn I got you. I heard Gojo Sensei told me he had to get you back later, but hold on. Apparently I missed the spot. So I think Yuta versus Kenjaku is definitely happening if he books it down quick enough. Once again, we just don't know the time frame between the panel of Kenjaku being like, what an interesting game we have here, and him being able to move Gojo. If you think, and I do think this is reasonable, if you think the Toji scuffle plus Yuta versus Awasaka and Toji and the whole grasshopper curse being broken down and the veil being broken down, if you think that is enough time for Kenny to pick up the box and dip, then he's likely picking up the box and dipping. He's probably it's gonna turn into Yuta chasing Kenjaku, which unironically wouldn't affect too many events. Because if characters still run into each other the way they do, if the Nanami crew still runs into Dagon, they get watched by Dagon and then Jogo, and then if Itadori still runs up into Choso, but then again, without Mekamaru, would Itadori run into Choso? That's likely still going to happen. I assume the split up would still occur, so we probably still would get Yuji versus Choso, then we may get Sukuna. I think Sukuna is still somewhat inevitable, because Jogo would always have the fingers, and unless the only timeline where Jogo does not activate Sukuna is if A, Yuji never runs into Choso, and it needs to be two factors. A, Yuji needs to never run into Choso, and B, Megami has to not summon Raga. If he summons Raga, Dagon and Jogo are cooked. Immediately, instantaneously. If Raga gets summoned. And then, no Sukuna. But then, no Megami, no Nanami, no Maki, no... Who am I missing? Naobito. Then we lose them. Mahito's still chilling, though. He's still vibing. But Jogo and Dagon would be cooked. Interesting.
The station. If Choso happened to be there, then Yuta would make short work of him. While Choso is a capable fighter in his own right, his primary target at this point is Yuji, and for a very specific reason, that being to avenge his brothers. Such thoughts give Choso strength when he needs it, and it's extra strength that he won't have in his battle against Yuta. Having taken part in last year's Goodwill event, it's also likely that Yuta has encountered blood.
Yuta would one-tap Choso. We literally, and notably, we do see the fight after the Naoya fight, where Choso was already expending a whole bunch of energy. But, like, Yuta does to Choso what people believe Yuta would do to Uro and Ryu if he was taking them seriously, quote-unquote. Now we extra know. I want every single Yuta fan to dap me up. All right? I know some of y'all, I've seen y'all in my comment section. I want every single one of y'all to dap me up. Yuta would never low diff Ryu. Never. I want y'all to realize that. Come with me, and we'll be in a world of complete exaltation as we all glaze Ryu Ishii Goat-ri. Because my boy would never be one-tapped by Yuta. I feel so vindicated by that Sukuna glaze. Thank you, Gege. But that aside, yeah, Choso gets one-tapped. If Yuta runs into him. Once again, I don't know. That's the thing about this timeline. I'm not sure what Yuji's doing. If he's with Mei, it's weird. Notably, ironically enough, if all domains end up targeting the soul, and like the smallpox deity ends up targeting Yuji's soul, aka Sukuna's soul, Sukuna will slaughter the smallpox deity. Which would be rough. Because then, like, Kenny walks away after dropping the smallpox deity, only for the whole crew to show up unharmed. And then Kenny would be like, what happened? And Yuji would be like, oh, the other guy. And then they'd all try to jump Kenny, and then Kenny would watch them all. So, interesting.
Manipulation before from Naruto Shikamo, although the extent to which he would have learned to deal with it is unknown. And even still, Choso makes a much more skilled blood manipulation user than Kamo does. Choso also sees post-Shibuya Yuji as a demon god, and given how even prior to all that, he had a fairly even fight with Yuji, and how he says Yuji would be unalived if he went up against Yuta, I think it's safe to say Choso is losing to Yuta. Also, sure, Choso was a bit tired from fighting Naoya, but Yuta did also come up and one-shot him, so yeah, safe bet to say Choso would lose. Since Yuji never lost to Choso, it's incredibly unlikely that Jogo would ever stumble across his body, since the two girls with the Sukuna finger would never release it in order to feed it to Yuji. In that case, going to where Dagon was is probably still what he'd do. There just wouldn't be any sorcerers for him to fight, and Dagon wouldn't be there either, for one or two reasons. As Megumi would likely have summoned Maharaga if he got put in a disadvantageous position.
Yeah, that's the thing. It really depends. How long do you think the Toji interaction took? How long do you think it took? Because if you think the Toji interaction took place in like 2 minutes, like Toji, and then he takes Playful Cloud, he beats Dagon up a little bit, then he sharpens them bad boys, and he exercises Dagon. If you think it takes like 2 minutes, then maybe Naobito starts patty caking a fatigued Dagon around. But then the moment Jogo shows up, cooks Naobito, boom, Raga's coming out. So I think Raga's inevitable. unless Dagon gets Megumi beforehand. But even then, I don't think that's happening with Naobito there. I think Naobito ends up dooming them all to Raga execution. Because he'd be able to patty cake Dagon around, but then Jogo would show up. If Naobito's still missing the arm, he'd be too slow. Yeah, Raga claps everybody's cheeks. Let's see.
And Dagon, without a way to take it down pre-adaptation, would have been finished alongside everyone else dragged into the exorcism ritual. At least that's one way to look at it. Since there is a very clear range limit on this, since everyone in Shibuya didn't get trapped into the ritual, then Megumi could possibly leave Nanami, Naobito, Maki, and Ino out, making a sacrifice play so that they can live. And to be fair as well, the last way to look at it is that they also could have a decent shot at exercising Dagon here, as Dagon would never have the sure hit effect from his domain to get the upper hand on Naobito and Nanami. Ooh, and with them around plus sure. Ino, Dagon won't be the untouchable monster he was when he first cast his domain in the main story. Although it is possible, I guess, that Dagon eventually would come to understand Naobito's technique, with Naobito stacking and constantly brutalizing him. I don't know how likely that is, and considering Maki tore a chunk out of Dagon's arm, and Naobito's ability to stop him from moving by pummeling him to the ground, it's pretty likely that Dagon would be taken out once again, but this time everyone won't be so beat up. That being the case though, Jogo is still on another level than Hanami, so they would immediately be thrown.
He did mean that. Yeah, I didn't think about that. Right. With Megumi there from round start, instantly opening domain, canceling out Dagon sure hit. They just bully Dagon. Again. Naobito just starts patty kicking him around his own domain. Because even one-armed Naobito was still, like, blitzing about Dagon. So, yeah, I didn't even think about it that way. Yeah, but then Jogo comes in. Actually, maybe not, though. maybe not, if Naobito still has both arms, and Dagon, a Jogo glazer, thinks that Naobito could be fat, Jogo likely opens domain. That's the thing. Jogo likely opens domain, and I don't think Megumi's open 2 domains in a day. So that's the best case scenario. That's the best case scenario. Jogo comes in after all that. He starts trying to work everybody. Naobito begins patty caking him about, just barely, by starting to stack speed. And then, in retrospect, Jogo's like, oh, forget all this. Coughing up the Iron Mountain. And then he starts coughing up the Iron Mountaining over everybody. And then they all lose. Because, like, not a soul there surviving that. And without Megumi being able to domain twice, yeah, it's not happening. It's not happening. Jogo ends up cooking him. But then, once again, he runs into the conundrum with his Treasure Eye Summon. And then Mahoraga beats Jogo. And then everybody perishes. Unless, once again, like you said, Megumi makes a sacrifice play and excludes everyone else from the ritual. And it's just Mahoraga, Jogo, and Megumi. Then Maki, Naobito, and Nanami, they all get to live in Ino as well in this timeline. But then Mahito starts chat walking up and starts collecting bodies. And they likely be burned just by being in Jogo's domain, for the most part. Probably. Let's see.
Into another fight, one that it's a lot less likely they'd make it out of. But we'll get back into that later. This video is about Yuta. Yuta, continuing to make his way down, would either run into Mahito or Kenjaku first, considering Mahito is just running around now looking for Yuji. Just to make this entertaining, let's play with the idea he runs into Mahito first and what would happen.
He spreads Mahito's cheeks, slathers them with butter, and then eats him alive. I'm not. Remember, this is a no Black Flash, likely still clone split Mahito. His curse energy is sectioned off, and he would be able to do literally 0 damage to Yuta. And he would never be able to transfigure him. It's very likely if he were to even try to domain Yuta, Yuta would just domain back. Because once again, he should have at least comparable reaction speeds to insta-domain back, even on a 0.2 second. And remember, Mahito only used the 0.2 second in response to Sukuna's presence, meaning he wouldn't do that. So he would go for the regular domain, then he gets counter domain, and then Rika and Yuta spread Mahito open and gobble his insides. Mahito versus Yuta is a horrid mismatch. And that's if you assume that Mahito has immunity to RCT. He's still a curse. He can likely get spat at by RCT and detonate. All Yuta needs to do is grab Mahito by them beautiful little lips and then boom, Mahito's in pieces and destroyed because he's still innately a curse. It may take a couple tries because he's likely more durable than Kurushi due to the nature of his soul technique, but yeah, Mahito versus Yuta, not a fair matchup at all. But let's see what Six has to say.
Following that, and then the same if he ran into Kenjaku first. If Yuta runs into Mahito first, it's going to be a bloodbath, and I mean that almost literally. We know from Rika that Yuta's curse energy can affect the soul, and even if you want to say it's too vague to make a claim like that, once the domain is expanded, Mahito's curse technique essentially gets rendered ineffective. This is how Mechamaru was able to affect his soul just prior to Shibuya, since domains negate curse techniques in order for the guaranteed hit to land. Even with that being said though, we have more evidence than that supporting Yuta being able to both see and interact with the soul. As per the statement I just mentioned from Kenjaku saying Yuta detained Rika's soul, the panel shown here of her soul is from the end of Volume 0, which at the end of Volume 0, Yuta hugs the soul form of Rika, clearly indicating he can see her and interact with her. So Yuta has 2 ways to beat up Mahito, and Mahito has no ways to beat Yuta. What I mean by this is
that's even worse. Notably, I've been kind of iffy on giving Yuta soul perception for that exact very same reason. Because notably, everyone sees Rika's soul at the end of 0. Like, no one asks Yuta, dude, are you tweaking? Like, there's nothing there. Like they all see the Rika husk deteriorate. And then just Rika Morimoto cheese in there. So, like, everyone sees it. So what? Does that mean, like, Maki and Inumaki also have soul perception and be able to damage Mahito? I don't think so. So I'd be a little iffy on giving you the soul perception. But at the same time, remember how Yuji's soul perception works. It works by subconsciously targeting the soul, by being a dual-souled being. So Yuta was technically never a dual-souled being, but he did detain another soul like success. So I can see it. I can see the vision. I wouldn't even be mad at it. Because notably, it would still be difficult for Yuta to beat Maki or Toji. Because the soul perception needs to be applicable to oneself and not just others. And even Sukuna admits the wound is harder to heal. And Sukuna has better RCT than Yuta. So, like, my Maki Toji agenda, even if you give Yuta soul perception, doesn't change. But it also makes my Yuta Solos the Disaster Curse agenda ever stronger. So, yeah, I'm going to lean with it, rock with it. Go ahead, Six. Spit!
If the difference between Mahito and his opponent is great enough, he can't just one-tap them with his curse technique. This is mentioned when he's fighting Todo. He's wondering if he can one-tap him in the state he's in, since he's so weakened. Also, given how Mahito is a blabbermouth about his technique, it's likely he'd tell Yuta what it is and how it works in order to get the disclosure amp. But even aside from that, it's not like Mahito would be able to put his palm on Yuta to transfigure his soul anyway. I suppose Mahito in the last ditch effort could try to do his 0.2 second domain expansion, but it's unlikely he'd be able to do it, given he was only able to pull off something so crazy because of his activation through Black Flash, which he wouldn't have landed in this fight due to not being able to touch Yuta. I say all this to say, I do not see the fight between Mahito and Yuta lasting for very long, with Kenjaku probably coming up after sensing the fight and helping Mahito retreat from Yuta, because if Mahito gets taken out here, then a large step of Kenjaku's plan is missing because he won't be able to absorb Mahito to get out of the transfiguration.
That's the big thing. If Yuta ever runs into Mahito, Kenny's sprinting there. Because, once again, it's not impossible for Kenjaku to start the Culling Games without Mahito. It's not impossible, I don't think. I think Kenny has enough confirmed high-level soul perception and affecting abilities that he wouldn't have to worry about it too much. But at the same time, it would just take way longer. He'd have to activate so many people. So, yeah, he's definitely booking it through Shibuya Station to get to Mahito in time. And then Yuta versus Mahito and Kenjaku may go a little bit different, but worst comes to worst, Yuta perception blitzes Kenjaku again. If you think Yuta just straight perception blitz Kenjaku to the point where he, like, just completely hit a cage 2 reversal on bro and still took his head off, same thing happens. Kenny would have to open with Domain, and Domain may accidentally destroy Mahito, which he may not do. So either Mahito gets exercised and then Kenny insta domains Yuta and Rika, or Kenny loses and Mahito perishes. So yeah, there's nothing good to come out of this timeline. Let's see.
I don't see, honestly, Kenjaku wanting to engage Yuta here, but with Mahito in the state he's in, and Yuta, well, being Yuta, it's not like Kenjaku can just easily retreat from him. It's also not like Kenjaku can just take Mahito here now and continue with his plan, as Mahito's curse technique had grown in the fight with Yuji to allow him to do that. I suppose his next best option would be to absorb Mahito and cast a binding vow allowing him to grow the technique, but honestly, him not being able to do this could just be seen as a plus for having Yuta in Shibuya this time around. I don't, however, think that Yuta could beat Kenjaku, at least not Yuta right here. As it stands, Yuta has no idea about barrierless domains, and Kenjaku is a...
Yeah, of course, this video came out 4 months ago, possibly 5 now. He mentions he posted this on October 31st, so November, it's now March of the time of recording. So yeah, this is well before Yuta's feat of one-tapping Kenjaku in the manga. Obviously, that would change his opinion now. Yuta would likely beat Kenjaku here. Even with the open barrier domain expansion, you could make a pretty solid argument for Yuta being able to face tank most of it. And like RCT brute force it, if not counter domain, since he doesn't have any knowledge of the buried domains, and then beating Kenny before his domain collapses. If I had to hazard a guess. Of course, Yuta's domain would once again be exponentially weaker at this point. It would legit, as far as we know, based on how True Embodiment of Pure Love or whatever ended up working out previously, where we see it against Sukuna and he only has he has 4 techniques, 3 of which he only obtained, 5 I think he has 5 techniques, 4 of which he obtained well after the Shibuya arc. He'd only have cursed speech, but once again, he has the physicals to one-tap Kenny. If you go by their interaction at the end of the Takuma Kenny fight. So, yeah. Yuta would clap Kenny's cheeks here. Regardless, at least in my opinion. So, still looking rough for Kenny, but let's see what he says with the lack of that context of that feat.
Far better sorcerer than Geto was when Yuta fought him, on top of possessing more curse techniques. If Yuki happens to get to Shibuya around this time though, things could go much better for Yuta, and I do think the both of them together would be able to probably take down Kenjaku. But to be fair, Yuta would be fighting Kenjaku much earlier than Yuki had originally pulled up in the story, so the likelihood of this outcome isn't high. As far as Yuta alone, I won't go in depth on him versus Kenjaku, especially since at the time of recording this video, spoilers for the manga by the way, so turn your volume down if you don't want that. Kenjaku versus Yuta is probably going to happen real soon, so let the outcome of that battle determine how you think this particular fight would go. I'm sure you can guess by that then what I would say about if Yuta ran into Kenjaku first instead of Mahito. It would be a similar situation, except he wouldn't have to absorb Mahito prematurely, and Yuki showing up becomes even less likely due to the faster pace of Yuta in this given scenario. All in all, this likely doesn't end too well for the sorcerers, and arguably even worse this time, with how it's possible to interpret Jogo versus the other sorcerers, and then subsequently Yuji versus Mahito, if Jogo happens to jump in that fight later. Like I said though, this is just the way I look at it. I obviously had to make certain decisions for the characters to keep things flowing, as a lot of JJK and especially Shibuya is something that was set up for a long time to go a specific way. Yuta kind of throws a wrench in there that makes things complicated just due to his status. If you feel like I was unfair somewhere or didn't give a character enough attention, that's fine. Like I said, there was like a million combinations to throw here.
Whoa! Ray Henry boss fight in Kingdom Hearts 2. What if I reacted to that video by regular Pat, which I've watched like 15 times already? Yeah, that would be here for 5 hours. But W video. He took a very dark interpretation of the timeline, which I actually do like. Notably, my timeline's way lighter. And now I'm interested to see other hypothetical runs of this video. I think I've seen other variations of what if Yuta was in Shibuya. So I'm probably going to cover some of those too. That's interesting. Because my timeline went way lighter, but at the same time, that's because I interpreted the narrative differently and how Yuta would interact a lot differently than what 6 did. So that's very interesting. See, that's why it's good to absorb other videos. You get different ideas, different ways, different thought processes. But overall, a very, very, very W video. But speaking of W videos, if you somehow made it all the way to the end of this video, please leave Shibuya Rika. Yeah. Not Yuta. Shibuya Rika in the comment section down below. I do thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like, share, comment, and subscribe, and make sure to hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on every videos that come to the channel. Also, I do have a Patreon down below where you can support me for as low as $1 taking things like exclusive videos, early content, and more. You also become a member of the channel for as low as $3 a month to get the same perks and more. Some of those perks can include the live reaction to the very next chapter of Jujutsu Kaisen, ad-free variations of all my videos, and if you become a $25 patron or a $25 member, you can order whatever video you want. Now, I do thank you so much for watching once again, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. This is Back with the Pencil, writing off. I'd like to give a thank you to our $3 members: O'Connor Plays, Greyhound, Atkins Void, Astro, Red Wolf 4765, Eternal Flame, and Teen Mitgow. And I'd like to give a thank you to our $5 patrons: Steron, Sean, Panda Goat, Midnight Lord 21, Metal Solid Crisis, Kevin, Ignil, and EHAC1. And I'd like to give a thank you to our $7 member, Autumn Mornings Lazo. And I'd like to give a big thank you to our $10 member, Jay Warrior. And I'd like to give another thank you to our $10 patrons, Joaquin and Idemo Kami. Along with another juicy thank you to our $25 patron, ChinaDoll09. And I'd like to give a final Giga Gargantuan thank you to our $25 patron, Calvin Elder.